listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Dick Shanley, and for the next hour I will be reading from Sunday, February 1st issue of the New York Times opinion section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is written by James Jamel Bowie. Minneapolis is Trump's Gettysburg. It was clear after the killing of Renee Good on January 7th that Operation Metrosurge, the Trump administration's pre-textual immigration crackdown in Minnesota, was a failure. Far from cowing the people of Minneapolis, Good's death at the hand of an ICE officer stiffened their resolve and led even more Minnesotans to join the fight against the president's masked paramilitaries. A less fanatical White House might have used that moment to stage a tactical withdrawal, to pull back on the assault and recalibrate in the face of stiff resistance. But in the actuality existing Trump administration, immigration policy is dictated by rigid ideologues. They met Good's death with insults, slander, and the promise of further repression. Kristi Noem, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, said Good was engaged in domestic terrorism. The White House Press Secretary, Carolyn Levitt, called Good a deranged lunatic. Vice President J.D. Vance said her actions were an attack on law and order, an attack on the American people. He also said the officer who shot Good was protected by absolute immunity. He later backtracked from this claim, insisting instead that he said the opposite, video evidence notwithstanding. We know what happened next. Last weekend, officers with Customs and Border Protection detained, beat, shot, and killed Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old ICU nurse who had been observing and fulfilling ICE and CP operations. Like Good's death, Preddy was caught on camera, and like Good's death, it was egregious. Images and video of Preddy's killing exploded on social media. Before the White House could even respond, there were protests on the ground, demands for accountability, calls to abolish ICE, and palpable discontent from across the political spectrum. And when the administration did address the killing, it returned to the same lies and distortions it used to try to discredit Good. The individual went and imposed their law enforcement operations, attacked those officers, had a weapon on him, and multiple dozens of rounds of ammunition, wishing to inflict harm on these officers, coming brandishing, like Noem said, as if video of the confrontation did not exist. Similarly, Stephen Miller, the president's Homeland Security advisor, called Preddy a domestic terrorist and accused Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, flaming the flames of insurrection for the singular purpose of stopping the deportation of illegals who invaded our country. By Sunday, officials in the Trump administration had begun to backpedal. By Monday, they were doing everything they could to appease the public's anger. First, administration officials announced that they would remove Gregory Bambino, the highly visible field commander for Customs and Border Protection, from the area. Homeland Security said it would remove some CBP agents from Minnesota, and President Trump said he would withdraw ICE officers as well. At some point, we will leave, he said. They've done a phenomenal job. This was no longer a defeat, it was a rout. The White House had failed to achieve its strategic objectives, the mass removal of immigrants from the Minneapolis area and the suppression of the administration's political opponents through force and the fear of force. It also lost much ground with the public on its most favorable issue. When Trump took office last January, he had a net 8-point advantage on immigration, according on average computed by the pollster G. Elliott Morris. Now he has a net 10-point disadvantage. Individual polls show an even starker decline. Trump is 18 points underwater on immigration, according to the latest poll from New York Times and Siena University. 61% of respondents also said that the tactics used by ICE have gone too far. Gettysburg was supposed to be the blow that forced the United States to negotiate at the end of the Civil War. General Robert E. Lee would demonstrate the superiority of his Army of Northern Virginia on Union soil, no less, and prove to key European powers that the Confederacy was here to stay, so as to push them off the sidelines. The Gettysburg Campaign was, in other words, a strategic offensive meant to advance the overall goals of the rebellion, if not win the conflict altogether. What Lee did not anticipate was the iron resolve, the ferocious tenacity of the Union defenders. The result was a catastrophic defeat for the Confederacy. Lee lost the initiative and would spend the rest of the war fighting in the defensive, unable to wage another strategic campaign. The Confederacy would not win foreign recognition, leaving it helpless against the Union blockade. And even with the tremendous loss of life, the Union Army suffered more than 23,000 casualties over 3 days of battle. The Northern Poles would be reinvigorated by victory, ready to continue the fight. ICE and CBP still roam the streets, and Trump's authoritative aspirations have not dimmed. But surveying the wreckage of Operation Metro Surge, of this reactionary administration's crushing defeat at the hands of another band of tenacious Northerners, it does look to me like MAGA's Gettysburg. The next article is written by Nicholas Kristof, one of my favorites, although all of them are my favorites. Whose America do we want? This is the story of two men who embodied opposing visions for America. Alex Preddy, 37-year-old ICU nurse gunned down by federal agents, represent one set of values. Gregory Bovino, who until a few days commanded federal agents in Minneapolis, represents a different set. A nation cannot be reduced to two men, of course, but perhaps their choices can clarify our own. Do we want to live in Alex Preddy's America or Gregory Bovino's? Preddy just exiled friendliness and kindness, Dr. Dimitri Derkopia, who worked with Preddy, told me. Greg Anja said that Preddy did not talk about patriotism as such, but that his choice of a Veterans Affairs hospital revealed his values. There are many jobs in nursing, but choosing to work with veterans is something many of us do because we appreciate being in a system that does what is needed and doesn't bill patients, Drek Gonja said. Preddy reportedly had his garage door fixed recently and gave the repairman a Latino $100 tip because of the crackdown on immigrants. He cared about people deeply. He was very upset with what's happening in Minneapolis. Michael Preddy, his dad, told the Associated Press. Preddy was both a sensitive man and a brave one, trying in his last moments to shield a woman in distress. Federal agents had attacked the woman, shoving her hard to the ground. Preddy stepped between her and her assailants, even as an agent sprayed chemical irritant in his face. That's when a group of agents seized him, took his legal firearm from him, and then shot him 10 times as he was unarmed and defenseless on the ground. As Alex ever wanted was to help someone, anyone, his younger sister Michaela said in a statement. Even in his very last moment on this earth, he was simply trying to do just that. Bovino represents an alternative kind of masculinity, a swashbuckling, armed to the teeth, never retreat machismo that has infused the Trump administration. Bovino joined the Border Patrol in 1996, but his career took off only last year, reportedly after the Trump administration noted his aggressive style and tapped him to manage major majority operations in Los Angeles. His team ferocity appalled many Californians, but won plaudits in MAGA circles. In Chicago last year, Bovino, with a mask and heavily armed agents, undertook a series of violent operations, including one that foreshadowed what happened in Minneapolis. An agent shot a U.S. citizen, Miramar Martinez, 5 times as she sat in her vehicle, and administration officials then accused her of being a terrorist who had attacked them. She survived, and the case against her collapsed, but the authorities have refused to release body cam video of the incident. In a scathing 233-page judgment, a U.S. District Court, Sarah Ellis described a patron of violent and lawless behavior in Chicago by federal agents under Bovino. Tear gassing expectant mothers, children, and babies shocks the conscience, she wrote. She dismissed Bovino's testimony as not credible, adding that Bovino admitted in his disposition that he had lied multiple times. Apparently unconcerned, Trump administration officials then dispatched Bovino to run the Operation Minneapolis, in which Renee Good was killed, and then Preddy. Hats off to the ICE agent who shot Good, Bovino declared. I'm glad he made it out alive. He later suggested, contrary to evidence, that Preddy had wanted a massacre law a massive law enforcement. There's a danger in telling these stories of shoehorning everything into a too neat narrative. Neither Preddy nor Bovino is a character. A video has surfaced of Preddy cursing federal agents, spitting at them, and kicking their vehicle and damaging it 11 days before his killing in the Moments. He does not seem as saintly as some eulogies suggest, but perhaps a bit more human. I frame this as a story of two men, but of course in reality it's a tale of two Americas. Bovino was not a rogue actor, and his policy was never his. It was always President Trump's. For now, Bovino has been exiled from Minneapolis, but the White House described him as a great professional who is going to very much continue to lead Customs and Border Patrol throughout and across the country. To me, this feels like one of the epic confrontations of my early childhood, the civil rights movement, when law enforcement turned fire hoses and police dogs on peaceful protesters. Back then, it was the states that employed violence, while federal agents tried to restrain them. Now, it is just the reverse. Those civil rights battles were resolved in part because the public recoiled after seeing the brutality police employed against protesters. These days, the bloodshed is even more visible. Revulsion and similar growing. And the horrors we have witnessed should impel more of us to take a stand. The question is straightforward. Which America do we choose? article is written by Maureen Dowd. Slovenia Sphinxes flicked next. The riddle of the Slovenian Sphinx has been solved. The perennial question about Melania Trump is really like behind her requisite mannequin's mask has been answered by her new infomercial, Melania. It turns out there is no riddle, no enigma, no mystery, no dark anguish. Melania is not Rapunzel in the tower, pining to be saved from the ogre imprisoning her. She is comfortable in the frost vertical solitude of the tower, swallowed in luxury. Some theaters showing Melania were so empty that WAGs suggested that the undocumented immigrants should hide out there. Reviews are brutal. The Independent said the First Lady came across as a preening, scowling void of pure nothingness in this ghastly bit of propaganda. The Guardian dismissed the movie as gilded trash, and Variety asked, why would Amazon pay $75 million on a movie that boring? I think we all know the answer to that. But the portrait, as Melania was nicknamed by Ivanka, who is revealing because it doesn't reveal anything. We don't even learn whether Melania's feet ache after hours of wearing stilettos. I picture her as having Barbie feet that cannot flatten. We knew everything we needed to know about her in the wake of January 6th. In the memoir of Stephanie Grisham, Melania's former aide and confidant, Grisham told a chilling story about the chilling First Lady. When the rioters broke through the barricade outside the Capitol, Grisham sent Melania a text. Do you want to tweet that peaceful protests are the right of every American, but there's no place for lawlessness and violence? Melania twisted back simply no. She was busy getting ready for a photo shoot of a rug she had chosen for the White House. Melania knows her deal with the author of The Art of the Deal. She seems to have no problem with his authoritarian waves. The president who once dreamed of being a Hollywood masher cast his cabinet based on who looks right for each part. He cast Melania in the alluring, supportive, and often silent wife. She accepted that role and isn't, as her movie claims, reinventing the role of the lady. The East Wing, until Trump tore it down, was her drop-by. Over the years, liberals have fantasized that she was a secret member of a resistance, that one day the Slovenian immigrant would renounce Trump's harsh policies on immigration, cascading his crude talk about women's private parts and looks. But stop waiting. She chose Brett Ratner, a director driven out of Hollywood after sexual assault and misconduct claims, to be her biographer. He dwelled salaciously on her 5-inch stilettos, long legs, comely ankles, and cascades of frosted hair. Melania is where she wants to be, in the bosom of a corrupt family, prostituting the people's house. The First Lady got a windfall from Jeff Bezos. Bezos' Amazon MGM studio made her movie, providing a whopping $40 million for the film and $35 million for marketing. Wall Street Journal reported her cut of the $40 million was at least $28 million. Money is where she wants to be, in the bosom of a corrupt family. This is particularly gross, even that Amazon is engaged in mass layoffs, and Bezos seems intent on starving his Washington Post of money and talent. The split screen of Bezos and his spendthrift wife, Lauren Sanchez, frolicking while the tech mogul defiles the crown jewel nurtured by Ben Bradley and Kay Graham is sickening. Speaking of sickening, in a 2002 email from the newly released Epstein files that the Times said is from Melania and appears to be written to Ghislaine Maxwell, Melania praises a profile of Jeffrey Epstein in New York Magazine and says of Ghislaine, "You look great on the picture." Ghislaine calls Melania Sweet Pea, and Melania signs her email, Love. The documentary features a candlelight dinner the night before Trump's second inauguration, where all the tech moguls who lavished him with money and gold gifts are partying at the National Building Museum, including Bezos with Sanchez and Elon Musk, and with his date on his lap. In a voiceover, Melania talks about her creative vision coming to life in the room filled with elegance and sophistication of our donors. They're truly the driving force behind the campaign and its philosophy and the reason our victory is possible. Thanks, Bezos and Musk and Tim Cook and Sam Altman and Mark Zuckerberg. Melania had editorial control over the movie, which covers the 20 days before the 2025 inauguration. There is a scene where Melania is proud to have persuaded her husband to proclaim in his inaugural address that he's going to be a unifier. She seems oblivious to the fact that his rhetoric and policies are designed to enrage and divide. She has a warm chat with her immigrant roots with a designer who is an immigrant from Laos, ignoring that her husband has torn America apart by denigrating immigrants and unleashing a rabid ICE force on American cities. Now, Trump has restricted visas from 75 countries, including Laos. Melania, the movie star, lives up to the message on the infamous jacket she wore to a migrant child detention center. "I really don't care. Do you?" Turns out she does care for herself. Huh. This is written by Ben Rhodes. Our national crisis goes deeper than ICE. The renewed calls to abolish ICE are an understandable reaction to intolerable reality. ICE has become dangerous and unaccountable by design under the second Trump administration, with its deportation quotas, dehumanizing rhetoric about immigrants, and extrajudicial pronouncement that agents have absolute immunity. The assault on Minneapolis has demonstrated what can happen when that toxic mix of incentives is unleashed on a community. ICE has operated more like an invading army than a force for public safety. But the rot goes deeper at the Department of Homeland Security, the behemoth that controls ICE, Customs and Border Patrol Protection, and myriad other federal agencies, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency to the Secret Service. Since DHS was founded in 2002, a combination of organizational flaws and mission creep has allowed it to evolve into out-of-control domestic security apparatus we have today, one that views the very people it is supposed to protect as threats, not humans. Last time we had a true debate on how the U.S. government should be organized to protect Americans and to protect what it means to be an American was almost a quarter century ago. After the attacks on September 11, 2001, politicians sparred over how to balance security and liberty, as if they had an opportunity size on a scale. Our obsession with security, aided by political determined not to appear weak, and Supreme Court decisions that empower the president, has obliterated that balance. As it has other countries, the pursuit of security paved the way for the consolidation of power. Now, Minnesota has neither security nor liberty. Unwinding this will take time and is unlikely during the Trump administration. But the time to start the debate is now, and there is one answer available if you look at the not-too-distant past. End immigration enforcement at the DHS and return it to the Department of Justice so that it is embodied in the rules of law. That goes beyond abolishing ICE in its current form. We must fundamentally overhaul DHS and end the securitization of American life, as we are just to have just and lasting peace in this country. In February of 2001, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld wrote a memo in which he quipped, "The word homeland is a strange word. Homeland defense sounds more German than American." Then came 9/11. In the immediate afterwards, every aspect of the plot was scrutinized. Why wasn't information about threats from Al-Qaeda shared across intelligence? How did the terrorists obtain visas? How did they board planes? Even knives and box cutters. The overwhelming instinct in Washington was to do something, lest we be caught unprepared again in just over a year. Congress codified the largest reorganization of the federal government since the creation of the national security state after World War II. The agencies most responsible for preventing attacks, FBI and CIA, were strong enough to evade the reform. Instead, lawmakers created the alphabet soup of agencies that became DHS. They took the Immigration and Naturalization Service and the Border Patrol away from the Justice Department and put them under the umbrella of the newly formed Department of Homeland Security. When President George Bush signed the legislation, he framed DHS as a counterterrorism enterprise. Because of his new cabinet department, he said America would be better able to respond to any future attacks, to reduce our vulnerability, and most importantly, prevent the terrorists from taking innocent American lives. He said nothing about immigration enforcement. It was an odd marriage from the beginning. The only connection but tissue among DHS component parts, and that they would be hypothetically play a role in preventing or responsible to terrorism. An ICE officer could deport a potential terrorist. FEMA personnel could respond to an attack. The Secret Service could rush the president to a secure location. By the time Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in 2005, it was clear that this mega counterterrorism wing of the government was going to be defined by other issues. Ever since DHS has been in search of a reason to exist. shifting its priorities to suit whichever president or political challenge was predominant, from terrorism to hurricane response to cybersecurity to counter-narcotics to border security and immigration enforcement. The department's one constant has been the DNA inherited from the War on Terror. Any Americans who have taken off their shoes to board a plane understand this intuitively, even if they don't know that the Department of Transportation used to oversee security screening at airports. All the inconvenience due to a single individual trying unsuccessfully to ignite a bomb in his shoes in 2001. Yet by creating DHS, we chose to view all people and goods as potential threats. And by moving so many functions of government under this umbrella, we chose to make them by design part of fighting a war. At first, the most visible and acute aspects of this took place aboard the place like Afghanistan and Iraq. Each of these efforts morphed quickly into lengthy counterinsurgency campaigns with elements of mass surveillance, intelligence fusion centers, military patrols, and target operations against threats, real or perceived. The mindset embodied itself at home DHS helped build the plumbing of domestic security state with its own fusion centers and expanding missions. 2012 Senate report found that these centers produce little of value while endangering civil liberties. Alongside the Pentagon, DHS also helped funnel into the surplus of military equipment generated to fight the war on terror to local police forces and federal agencies. The armored vehicles, the drones, body armor, and assault weapons once used to fight insurgents abroad. ICE has become a poster child for this mission creep. Removed from the Justice Department, it was decoupled from the Immigration and Naturalization Services. The result, a security force untethered from prosecutorial norms, judicial oversight, or a culture that protects rights. After Congress failed to pass immigration reform, it plowed resources into reinforcement. In the Obama years, we saw that a down payment on legislation that would create a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. We were wrong. At DHS building its intelligence surveillance capabilities, ICE became a consumer of even more sophisticated data to support a higher operational pace. In these operations, it used its growing stockpile of military hardware. At the hiring of Agent Surge, ICE uprising turned to veterans of post-9/11 wars to fill its force. Minneapolis has resembled a counterinsurgency campaign more than a law enforcement operation because that's what it is, complete with tactics, equipment, legal authorities derived from the war on terror. Mr. Trump may have been the one who ordered the crackdown we're living through, but it's possible only because of the architecture of DHS, Homeland Defense, which is now beginning to feel German in the way Rumsfeld feared. Democrats have already opposed sound reforms for how ICE should operate. No masks, no operations at schools, churches, or hospitals, enhanced vetting of recruits and training in de-escalation, focuses on Mr. Trump's promise of people convicted of crime. Prohibiting arrest without judicial warrants would simply reinforce the law that ICE should be followed in the first place. The very need for these reforms makes the case for deeper structural change. By returning the functions of ICE and citizenship and immigration to the Justice Department, we can once again embed immigration enforcement and naturalization in a part of government responsible for both enforcing and adhering to the law. This would end ICE as it is without abandoning the necessity of immigration enforcement. Of course, this change is hard to imagine during the Trump administration, nor is the current version of the Department of Justice fit for the purpose. Under Mr. Trump, the department acts as an extension of the president's prerogative, policy, and personnel. But Americans are hungry for alternatives, and the current reality is not become permanent. Putting forward ideas for reform rejects a sense of inevitability that a strongman tries to create and gives Democrats blueprints for how to rebuild when the opportunity presents itself. Moving aliens and citizenship and immigration services back to the Justice Department is not a radical idea. It would simply restore long-standing constitutional governance of our immigration system. Immigration laws would be enforced within a culture comfortable with judicial oversight, prosecutorial norms, and the protection of civil and human rights. It would also locate these functions within a department ready dispensable for the judges who determine whether an immigrant should be removed from the U.S. Yes, the Justice Department is susceptible to politicization, but it has held in the past to transparency and accountability that Homeland Security clearly lacks. Customs and Border Protection could stay within a smaller DHS, but it should focus on securing our borders, not enforcing operations within them. DHS should not have domestic policy enforcement, detention, or other intelligence gathering functions. Let the Justice Department do that. None of this diminishes real threats, from terrorism to hackers, from fentanyl to pandemics. But the lesson from the past failures, including 9/11, is about the need for effective coordination by government. Instead, we have lived through the consolidation of power within. DHS should focus on working with others to secure the border, cyberspace, infrastructure, and transportation, not being part of a war or building fiefs like ICE. Years ago, into it, the war on terror has become a war against ourselves. A forever war must come to an end. Enough with the military gear. Enough with the mass surveillance. Enough with the constant fear of an ever-shifting other. Democrats should not be afraid to make the case for this or other structural changes to DHS. And an immigration system is desperate need of a comprehensive reform. Yes, Americans want a secure border, but most of us are also tired of war, worry of intrusive militarized government, welcoming of immigrants, and protective of our freedoms. Mr. Trump's administration should be the period that concludes the post-9/11 era. Next article is written by David Brooks, another favorite. Time to say goodbye. My grandfather, Bernard Levy, played a big role in my childhood. When we weren't exploring New York City together, he was writing letters to the editor of the New York Times from his law office, in the Woolworth Building in Lower Manhattan. And if memory serves, he might have even gotten a few published. He had died by the time I was hired as a columnist here, but he would have been my first call. The journey from the little tenement house he grew up on the Lower East Side to my position at this newspaper is part of our family's experience of the American dream. It's been the honor of a lifetime to work here, surrounded by so many astonishing journalists. But after 22 wonderful years, I've decided to take the exciting and terrifying step of leaving in order to try to build something new. When I came to the Times, I set out to promote a moderate conservative political philosophy informed by thinkers like Edmund Burke and Alexander Hamilton. I have been so fantastically successful in bringing people to my point of view that moderate Republicans are now the dominant force in American politics, holding grace everywhere from the White House to Gracie Mansion. I figure my work here is done. I'm kidding. In reality, I've long believed that there is a word market failure in American culture. There are a lot of shows on politics, business, and technology, but there are not enough on the fundamental questions of life addressed as part of a great liberal arts education. How do you become a better person? How do you find meaning in retirement? Does America still have a unifying national narrative? How do great nations recover from tyranny? When I think about the world, how the world has changed since I joined the Times, the master trend has been Americans' collective loss of faith, not only religious faith, but many other kind. In 2003, we were still relatively fresh from our victory in the Cold War, and there were more faith that democracy was sweeping the globe, more faith in Americans' goodness, more faith in technology, and more in one another. As late as 2008, Barack Obama could run a presidential campaign soaring with hopeful idealism. The post-Cold War world has been a disappointment. The Iraq War shattered American confidence in its own power. The financial crisis shattered Americans' faith that capitalism, left alone, would produce broad and stable prosperity. The interest did not issue in an era of deep connection, but rather an era of growing depression, enmity, and loneliness. Collapsing levels of social trust reveal a comprehensive loss of faith in our neighbors. The rise of China and everything about Donald Trump shattered our serene assumption about America's role in the world. We've become a sadder, meaner, and more pessimistic country. One recent historical study of American newspapers found that public discourse is more negative now than at any other time since the 1850s. Large majorities say our country is in decline, that experts are not to be trusted, that cities don't care about regular people. Only 13% of young adults believe America is headed in the right direction. Let me read that again. Only 13% of young adults believe America is heading in the right direction. 69% of Americans say they do not believe in the American dream. Loss of faith produces a belief in nothing. Trump is nihilism personified, with his assumption that morality is for suckers, that life is about power, force, bullying, and cruelty. Global populists seek to create a world in which only the ruthless can thrive. America is becoming the rabid wolf of nations. Nihilism is the mindset that says that whatever is lower is more real. Selfishness, egoism, and the lust for power drive human affairs. Altruism, generosity, honor, integrity, hospitality are mirages. Ideals are shams that the selfish use to mask their greed. Disillusioned by life, the cynic gives himself permission to embrace brutality, saying, "We won't get fooled again. It's dog eat dog. If we're going to survive, we need to elect bullies to high places." 2024, 77 million Americans voters looked at Trump and saw nothing morally disqualifying about the man. Another editorial comment. The article says, voted for Trump and saw nothing morally disqualifying. How about Trump getting off an airplane and saying it's okay to grope women? It's tempting to say that Trump corrupted America, but the shredding of values from the top was preceded by a decades-long collapse of values from within. 4 decades of hyper-individualism expanded individual choices, but weakened the bonds between people. Multiple generations of students and their parents fled from the humanities and the liberal arts, driven by the belief that the prime purpose of education is to learn on how to make money. We're abandoning our humanistic core, the elements of our civilization that lift the spirit, nurture empathy, and orient the soul now play a diminished role in national life. Religious devotion, theology, literature, art, history, philosophy. Many educators decided that because Western powers spawned colonialism, and they did, students in the West should learn nothing about the lineage of their civilization and should thereby be rendered cultural orphans. Activists decided persuasion is a myth and that life is a ruthless power competition between oppressors and oppressed groups. As a result of technological progress and humanistic decay, life has become dejectively better, but subjectively worse. We have wide personal freedom, but utterly fail to help people answer the question of what that freedom is for. The most grievous cultural wound has been the loss of shared moral order. We had multiple generations to come up with their own individual values. This privatization of morality burdened people with a task they could not possibly do, leaving them morally inarticulate and uninformed. It created a naked public square where there were no broad arguments about what was true, beautiful, and good. Without shared standards of right and wrong, it's impossible to settle disputes. It's impossible to maintain social cohesion and trust. Every healthy society rests on some shared conception of the sacred heroes, sacred texts, sacred ideals. And when that goes away, anxiety, atomization, and a slow descent toward barbarism are the natural results. It shouldn't surprise us that according to one Harvard study, 58% of college students say they are experiencing no sense of purpose or meaning in their life. It's 58%. It shouldn't surprise us that people are so distrusting and demoralized. I'm haunted by an observation that Albert Camus made about his continent 75 years ago. The men of Europe no longer believe in the things that exist in the world and in living man. The secret of Europe is that it no longer loves life. We could use better political leadership, of course, but the crucial question facing America, how can we reverse the this pervasive loss of faith in one another, in our future, in our shared ideals. I do not believe that most people can flourish in a meaningless, nihilistic universe. Despite what the cynics say, I still believe that we're driven not only by selfish motivation, but also by the moral ones, the desire to pursue some good, the desire to cooperate, to care for one another, and to belong. Life is about movement, and the flourishing life is the same eternal thing. Some men or women striving and struggling in service to some ideal. Where do people and nations go to find new things to believe in, new values to orient their lives around? Where do they go to revive the humanistic core? They find these things in the realm of culture. In my reading history, cultural change precedes political and social change. You need a shift in thinking before you can have a shift in direction. Excuse me. You need a different spiritual climate. By culture, I don't mean going to the opera and art museums. I mean culture in the broadest sense. A shared way of life, a set of habits and rituals, popular songs and stories, conversations about ideas, big and small. When I use the word culture, I mean everything that forms the subjective. I mean everything let me read that again. I mean everything that focuses the subjective parts of a person, perceptions, values, emotions, opinions, loves, enchantments, goals, and desires. I mean everything that shapes the spirit of the age, the moral and intellectual moment, which constitutes the shared water in which we swim. In this definition, every member of society has a role in shaping the culture. We all create a moral ecology around ourselves, one that either elevates the people we touch or degrades them. Edmund Burke argues that culture, which he called manners, is more important than politics. Manners, he wrote, are the most important than laws. Upon them, in a great measure, the laws depend. The law touches us, but here and there, and now and then. Manners are what vex or soothe, corrupt or purify, exalt or debase, barbarize or refines by a constant, steady, uniform, insensible operations like that of the air we breathe in. They give us what form and what color to our lives. According to their quality, they add morals that supply them. The good news is that culture changes all the time as people adjust to meet the crisis of the moment. In the 1890s, the social gospel movement, with its communal emphasis, displaced the social Darwinist culture with its individual survival of the fittest emphasis. That cultural shift eventually led to political change, the progressive era. American culture also shifted radically between 1955 and 1975, producing a culture that was less conformist, less sexist and racist, more creative than one that came before, though also more atomized. The culture war that began in that era, both modern, left, and the modern right. American culture today is already vastly different from how it was during the Great Awakening in 2020, the Great Awakening of 2020. We Americans went through hard times before, and we have always recovered through a process of cultural rupture and repair. Some old set of values and practices has to be torn away, and some new ones embraced. Trump is that rare creature, a Philistine who understands the power of culture. He put professional wrestling on stage at the last Republican convention for a reason, to lift up a certain masculine ideal. He's taken over the Kennedy Center for a reason, to tell a certain national narrative. Unfortunately, the culture he champions, because it is blunt upon domination, is a dehumanizing culture. The humanism, by contrast, is the antidote to nihilism. Nihil is anything that upholds the dignity of each person. Anti-going is trying to rebury her brother to preserve a family home. Lincoln rebinding the nation in the second inaugural address. Martin Luther King Jr. writing that letter for the Birmingham jail. These are examples of humanism. Tracy Chapman and Lake Combs singing Fat Cat at the Grammys was humanism. These are examples of people trying to inspire moral motivations, pursue justice, and move people to become better versions of themselves. Humanism comes in many flavors: secular humanism, Christian humanism, Jewish humanism, and so on. It is an endeavor that deepens our understanding of the human heart, an effort to realize eternal spiritual values in our own time and circumstances. Any gesture that makes other people feel seen, heard, and respected. Sometimes it feels as if all of society is a vast battleground between the forces of dehumanization on the one side and rapid partisanship, social media, porn, and bigotry, and the beleaguered forces of humanization on the other. You have been listening to a reading of Articles and Features from Sunday, February 4th, issue of the New York Times Opinion Section. We read from the New York Times Opinion Section every Sunday at 2 p.m. Your reader's been Dick Shanley, and thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, followed at 4 by a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Please stay for these readings and more throughout the day, and feel free to contact us with your comments, suggestions, with any questions you may have. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have a